Namaskar. Connections and disconnections. The making of Bombay slash Mumbai as India's global city. Scholarly literature on global cities has been criticized for ignoring the long-term historical context within which cities articulate the relationship between the global and the local, employing a long-durée globalization perspective. This paper historicizes the unequal and uneven nature of contemporary urban development in Mumbai, India's global city. The paper uses two analytical frames, the port city and the colonial city, to highlight two essential dimensions of Mumbai's contemporary transformation of interconnectedness and segmentation based on unequal power. I will not claim to possess the prophetic insight to foresee what is in store for Bombay, but as it has adopted the happy motto of Ars Prima in Indis, it may be hoped that this will prove of good augury, and that among other privileges, Bombay will earn that of priority among the Indian cities for longevity in undecaying prosperity. Da Kunha urban landscapes come to reflect various layers of sedimentation of past usage and organization, as well as to embody a range of possible meanings and actions falling outside the shifting levels of specification brought to bear on these landscapes by prevailing and often fragmentary apparatus of control. Simon apparatus apparent usage of control. Simon, contemporary globalization is marked by an urban turn, with the city becoming important both as a place and a site of discourse on the social sciences and policy making. Prakash Sasin, moreover, with the shift of global trade towards Asia, there is a renewed interest in urban development in this region. Amin and Thrift Roy, Asian states are systematically orchestrating nation growth by reinventing their cities through extensive centralized political and economic development. In the post-reform in the years, India too has adopted a dominant city-centric growth strategy. Kennedy and Jera, the city of Mumbai, that is India's global city, is of particular importance to the political and business elite in India, who view it as the driving force of India's economic integration in the world economy. Mumbai is hailed as India's most modern, Patel and global city. Nijaman, the modern Nijman, the modern view of Bombay slash slash Mumbai is based on its economic vitality and its cultural appeal as India's most cosmopolitan city that nurtures diverse arts, theatre, literature, music, and films. Bombay slash Mumbai has been the birthplace of modern Indian painting and progressive modern theatre in both English and native languages. It is home to the radical Dalit literature produced primarily by the historically most oppressed castes. It also houses Bollywood, India's premier film industry. However, the city is also notorious for its seamy underbelly of crime and the underworld, as well as a regressive anti-migrant and anti-Muslim urban movement since the 1960s in the form of the Shiv Sena. Mumbai is also India's global city, as it is the most globally connected city in India, having the largest share of international trade and foreign direct investment in India. Nijman, given its unique status, one project has taken center stage and captured the hearts and minds of the middle classes and the elite in the city since the mid-1990s. Urban planners are obsessed with entrepreneurial and technocratic visions of transforming Mumbai into a world-class city modeled on cities such as Shanghai. Mumbai's post-reform urban transformation since the early 1990s has been a focus of considerable research in recent years. Anjaria, Banerjee, Guha, Gandhi, Gard J. Harris, Nijman, Jera. However, there is a relatively less nuanced historical discussion on long-term global processes impacting the city and its emergence as a privileged site of concentrated economic activity and investment in India. Nijman. New urban experiments are now introduced tabula rasa in the city but jostle with inherited institutional frameworks, patterns of socio-spatial development and power geometrics in the context of citizen globalization. Scholars employing path and dependent analysis have demonstrated how the global reach and the internal social and spatial polarization of world cities are based on their particular histories of hegemony. Chakraborty Nijman in Nijman's words, each phase of historical development produces an urban space on top of that which is left behind by history. For example, Grant and Nijman's study demonstrates the correspondence between the new corporate geography of Mumbai post 1990s and the earlier colonial period. The study shows that there is a high concentration of business activity with sizable Indian and foreign-owned companies in South Mumbai, where the old European town existed. On the other hand, the old native town of the colonial period retains a bazaar atmosphere. Grant and Nijman, thus contemporary efforts at urban redevelopment of Mumbai confront grave challenges posed by the historical social inequalities and built environment in the city. Therefore, to achieve a deeper understanding of contemporary urban transformation in Mumbai, we need to examine the long-term historical factors that shaped the city, employing a long-durée globalization perspective. The paper does this through the use of two analytical frames to highlight the two essential dimensions of Mumbai's contemporary transformation of interconnectedness and segmentation based on unequal power. The first emphasizes Bombay/Mumbai as a port city where human interconnectivity is based on trade and how port cities evolved as key nodes in various trade networks. Renstich. The second emphasizes Bombay/Mumbai as a colonial city where the dimension of inequality based on the unequal nature of colonial power, in which colonial urban development primarily served the interests of the colonial elite king. One of the critical features of the contemporary phase of globalization is the re-emergence of cities as central nodes in the world economy. It is recognized that urbanization can no longer be understood solely by the political economy of regions or within the boundaries of nation states, and that there is a need for an analytical disarticulation of cities and nations. Davis. The world system theory provides a framework to understand how processes of urbanization connect with the structural changes in the world economy. Brodel, Wallerstein. Influenced by this approach, the world city, Friedman, and the global city, Sasson, have emerged as critical theoretical constructs for informing the discussion of cities and contemporary globalization. However, the world/global city paradigm has ignored the long-term historical context within which cities articulated the relationship between the global and the local, and therefore exaggerate the historical uniqueness of contemporary urban transformations. Scholars advocating a long-durée globalization approach have shown that cities as key nodes were engaged in wider circuits of production, exchange and culture through history. Abu Lughod, Agrihi, Brodel, Brenner, Gills and Thompson King. According to Brenner, the long-duration historical analysis places standard interpretations of contemporary urban restructuring in the broad geohistorical context of earlier rounds of globally induced transformations within each city. This enables us to understand how certain locally specific factors, processes, and developments have enabled cities to acquire a specific world-city functions in the contemporary context. Therefore, rather than understanding global forces as macrostructural background conditions, the long-term historical perspective incorporates a path-dependent analysis where earlier historical events provide a causal context for subsequent development. Brenner. Renstich's long-duration approach understands globalization as an evolutionary process in the making of an extended period of human history, rather than an unique occurrence that started in the latter part of the 20th century. According to Renstich's path-dependent approach, each new long wave of global change builds upon past patterns of change and is carried forward through an evolutionary logic driven by the human agency through the innovative use of resources, thereby strengthening the global layers of interactions. Renstich. According to Renstich, in the evolution of global system, world cities have constituted the major nodes of connection. However, this evolutionary logic of change does not have a linear dynamic of an ever increasing level of global interaction. This historical evolution is marked by periods of punctuation brought about by political and military black blockages of trade, forcing agents to adapt either by adopting new connections or restructuring existing nodes, or even develop new nodes and subsequently a new system. As a result, within this evolutionary dynamic, the system can alternate between inward and external orientated phases. Renstich finds that broadly there have been three distinct network systems in the modern global system: the commercial maritime system, the industrial production system, and the emerging new digital commercial system. Both the commercial maritime and digital system displayed external network relations, whereas the industrial phase was more internally oriented. In terms of the path-dependent analysis of the development of the modern global system, Renstich describes a three-step path-dependent evolution of the global system in which the Phoenician maritime commercial system contributed to the growth of a global maritime external commercial system that is currently transforming into an external network system based on digital communication. According to Renstich, the Phoenician network system 1100 BCE to 850 BCE and centered on current regions of Lebanon and Syria was the first truly transcontinental system based on maritime nodes of world cities in three different continents. This system led to the emergence of cities such as Byblos, Tyre, and Arwad, with the larger Assyrian Empire. However, it was around 900 CE that the modern era of globalization began, driven by the expansion of maritime trade by Sung China in the Indian Ocean, harnessing seasonal monsoon in Arabic Mawsim winds. Arabian sailors and traders established extensive patterns of migration and social relationship, further intensifying linkages between diverse civilizations, including Abyssinian, Arab, Egyptian, Harappan, Persian, Somali, Swahili, Indian, Malay, Chinese, Paraka. Later, these maritime links were widened by maritime powers of Portugal, the Netherlands, and England. through the voyage of Vasco da Gama in 1497 to 1499. The Portuguese were able to link the Asian maritime trade with the Atlantic during the 17th century. The Dutch, along with the trade with the East, were engaged in an Atlantic triangular trade between Europe, Africa, and the Americas, which were later contested and extended by England after 1650 through trade in mass consumed goods, resulting in London becoming a major financial node in the world economy. Renstage. The externalizing tendency was punctuated at around 850 with the introduction of a relatively internal oriented industrial system. With the growth of digital technologies in recent years, there is a re-emergence of an external oriented global system, the momentum for which was set in the late 20th century through a transformation in the communication technologies through the invention of the telephone, typewriters, and the electrical telegraph. Renstage. The emerging digital system marks a return to an external network system, replacing the internal oriental industrial system in place since the mid 19th century. Renstage. It is precisely its digital nature and the possibilities it opens up that differentiate it from the previous external network system. This new system, based on the use of digital technologies powered by the internet, enables much deeper integration and a broader organizational and institutional change. The United States, due to its wider reach of digital infrastructure, is a central node in this new information system, with other countries linked to the United States. It is in this context that we need to understand the current re-emergence of cities, global cities, as essential nodes that articulate transnational flows of goods, capital, and people. The above discussion on nodes and networks helps us in understanding the historical evolution of contemporary global cities, thereby problematizing the supposed novelty of some of the discussion on contemporary urbanization. However, this network-based analysis does not adequately address the role of power and ideology in shaping global change, even though Renstage acknowledges the role of human agency in driving global systemic change. The agency is assumed to be power neutral. In this context, the analytic frame of the colonial city is more suitable for understanding the historical role of power in shaping contemporary inequalities in post-colonial cities such as Bombay/Mumbai. According to King, a colonial city is that urban area in the colonial society most typically characterized by physical segregation of its ethnic, social, and cultural component groups, which resulted from the processes of colonialism. King prefers to use the term urban development as opposed to urban growth while discussing urban change. For King, urban growth presupposes a non-agental revolutionary nature of urban change that does not take into account the role of power in shaping urban processes. On the other hand, urban development refers to urban change as a conscious, planned, and directed process circumscribed by the uneven power of human agency, as discussed later in the context of Bombay/Mumbai. This is evident by the role played by the state, colonials, and post-colonial and the elite in transforming the city. The period between the 18th and 20th century was particularly crucial in the Indian context, as it is the introduction of the modern industrial phase of colonial urbanization. This period led to the disruption of traditional market structures, and the colonial city, segregated from its hinterland and employed in the service of the metropolitan economy. Castells used the term dependent urbanization to characterize the relationship between the colonial city and the metropolitan economy. The urbanization of the colonial society was dependent upon the industrialization of the metropolitan society, or as Simon puts it, it was in the context of an enforced engagement with the European world. This dominance-dependence relationship is visible at the city level in the separation between the native and European areas of the city, where the European quarter was dependent on the labor of the native quarter. This segregation between the two areas is visible even today in the architectural landscapes of post-colonial cities. Even the provisions of services, amenities such as roads, recreational space, water, electricity lines, sewage, housing, shopping, and hotels were concentrated in the European sector. In contrast, there was severe neglect and underinvestment in the native quarters of colonial city. King, 1976. Page 282. Scholars have used the term the dual city, Abu Lughod, or the unintended city, Nandi, to describe this uneven legacy of the interdependence between the urban elites and the urban poor. Simon argues that the historical legacy of dependence is also visible in the relationship between the colonial state and the urban elite, reproduced in the post-colonial context. Simon, 2004, further argues that in the contemporary context, this transfer of metropolitan values continues through various development models whereby cultural categories are assumed to be universal, giving rise to the new modes of dependence. Page 280. Colonialism not only shaped a particular nature of urban development but also led to considerable structural and organizational changes in the systems of production, governance, and knowledge creation. As Simon observes, in the case of Africa, the colonial project of urbanization involved a kind of remaking of pre-colonial cultures in a mostly rural continent, and cities would act instrumentally on African bodies or social transformations. Simon further argues that this urbanization set the framework within which Africans began to relate to each other within cities, as well as how they interacted with the outside world. He states the present emphasis on decentralization, local management, the exigencies of poverty alleviation, and regionally articulated local economic development are all in significant ways a reformulation of instruments used to evolve urban life according to the conditions that would ensure a very specific engagement with non-local worlds. Simon. Post-colonial cities in the global south are a product of colonial economies and the constant migration of people to cities. Cities became places of refuge to the multitude of people displaced from rural areas as a result of the colonial economy. Simon. Drawing upon insights from the two analytical frames emphasizing both interconnection and segmentation, the following section presents a historical account of the evolution of Bombay/Mumbai from a small fishing hamlet in the mid-16th century under European dominance to India's post-colonial global city in the 20th century. Scholars have pointed before in the context of Bombay/Mumbai that the city does not demonstrate a linear global dynamic, rather a cyclic evolutionary history marked by periods of internal and external, that is global orientation shaped by broader world historical processes. Nijman. Based on the insights of Renstich, 2006, this section retraces Bombay/Mumbai's historical trajectory becoming India's global city through several stages, where each new stage adds layer of global interconnection marked by periods of punctuation or blockages that either offered an opportunity for the city to extend outward or become inward oriented. Tables below. Table Table 1 summarizes this discussion. Table 1 Historical evolution of Bombay/Mumbai. Network system period. Global orientation. Punctuation/blockages. Commercial maritime system. Network system. Commercial maritime system. Global orientation. External network system. Pre-colonial maritime trade period 13th century BCE to 16th century CE. Global orientation. Magadha Empire. Sil Haras Delhi Sultanate. Mughals. Punctuation/blockages. European powers in the subcontinent. Network system. Early European maritime expansion period 1550s to 1750s. Global orientation. Portuguese, Dutch, British. Punctuation/blockages. Decline of Surat. Reconfiguration of Western India trade. Network system. Export of opium and cotton period from 1750s to 1880s. Global orientation. British. Punctuation/blockages. Opium wars. Network system. Industrial production system period from 1857 to 1984. Global orientation. External and internal. Punctuation/blockages. Network system. Cotton textiles period from 1850 to 1947. Global orientation. British/external. Punctuation/blockages. Indian independence. Import substitution. Network system. Post-colonial period from 1947 to 1984. Global orientation. Indian/internal. Punctuation/blockages. Deindustrialization. Network system. Digital/global commercial system period 1990. Global orientation. External. Post pre-colonial maritime trade. Bombay, unlike some of the other cities of India, such as Delhi, Agra, Lahore, Varanasi, Hyderabad, or Ahmedabad, has a relatively short history of urban settlement. Patel. The word Bombay itself was a corrupted Portuguese usage of the island's indigenous name derived from Mumba Devi, a patron goddess of the Kolij, the indigenous people of the region. However, to appreciate Bombay's growth as a port city during the British expansion in the 19th century, one has to take into account a much earlier history of adaptation, an expansion of maritime network of trade and a cultural exchange in the Indian Ocean region. The earliest archaeological evidence suggests that the region around Bombay had pre-colonial trade connections with Persia and Rome. It is speculated that Ptolemaios Ptolemaios Juhaptanasia. 7 islands were the 7 islands of Bombay. Koiman. The original 7 islands that became present-day Mumbai had been a part of the Magadha Empire ruled by Ashoka in the 3rd century BC. The 7 islands were later under the control of the Hindu Silhara dynasty until 1343 AD, until the Islamic Sultanate of Gujarat annexed to them. Passioni. However, some scholars attribute the 13th century pre-colonial maritime networks in the region extending from the Red Sea to the South China Sea for the dominance of Asian trade connections in the world economy. Dwara, Sen. The latter European colonial trade and power expanded and built upon these older pre-colonial networks of mobile merchant communities of Asia, constituted by the Arab, Chinese, Indian, and Baghdadi, Jews involved in long-distance credit networks. Chaudhary argues India in the pre-colonial period provided a vital junction point to three different networks of trade and civilization. The first linking its west coast to Arabia, East Africa and Levant. The second its northwest to Central Asia and Iran. The third its southeast to Southeast Asia. Boschbrook argues that until the 16th century, Europeans played a marginal role in this Asian world dominated by the Arabs, Ottomans, Mughals, the Ming and the Qing. Early European maritime expansion, as explained by Renstich, from the 16th century, beginning with the voyage of Vasco da Gama in 1497 to 1499 AD, from 1497 to 1499 AD, and the subsequent linking of the British through trade in mass consumed goods. The European powers began to dominate these pre-colonial trade networks through imperialism by expanding and building upon these older pre-colonial networks. Dwara argues that the British Empire in the 19th century had the effect of intensifying some of the old relationships and generating new linkages between cities and hinterlands of Aden, Bombay, Calcutta, Singapore, Hong Kong and Shanghai as entreports and financial centers for Asian trade. Bombay was one of the 25 islands along the Konkan coast of western India. Dakuna. Six other islands were united together with the island of Bombay through land reclamations to form a larger entity called Bombay. The Portuguese transferred Bombay to the British in 1661 AD as part of a dowry of Princess Catherine. Even during the late 18th century, Bombay was primarily a maritime post with very few linkages with its hinterland. However, Bombay possessed several promising geographical linkages that led to its emergence as India's leading port city in the 19th century. It possessed a safe and natural harbour that suited the maritime interests of the British East India Company (EIC). Koyman, 1985, page 209. It was predominantly under the British Empire that Bombay emerged as an urban centre. As discussed earlier, King understands colonial urbanization as urban development as opposed to urban growth. As discussed earlier, King understands colonial urbanism as urban development as opposed to urban growth. This fact is especially relevant in the case of Bombay. Even though it possessed a natural geographical advantage as a port, Bombay's rise to prominence as a port city was not inevitable but a result of conscious planning. Apart from harsh living conditions on the island itself, Bombay was also inaccessible to its hinterland as it was surrounded by the mountainous topography of the Western Ghats, preventing the formation of land routes. Thus, Bombay's late emergence as a vibrant port city has not only to do with its global linkages in the world economy but also with its local linkages or lack thereof with its hinterland. In this context, Koyman argues that Bombay's history confirmed the general trend that port cities only grew after their surrounding countryside was commercialized. As a result of Bombay's inaccessibility, much of the trade along the western coast was restricted in the Gulf of Khambat, north of Bombay, in places such as Khambat, Bharuch, Daman and Diu and more Importantly, Surat, which was the principal port along the western coast in the 17th and early 18th century. Surat had been a significant trading site of the Mughal Empire, connecting the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea and regions beyond Cape Comorin. In the 17th century, Surat possessed the largest merchant fleet in the Indian Ocean. Moreover, Surat was also an important connection point for pilgrims going to Mecca. The Mughal emperor allowed certain European companies to set up their factories. The British East India Company set up a factory in Surat in 1612 after obtaining a license from the Mughal emperor, and since then much of its trade in the 17th century was centered in Surat. The Dutch and the French companies too followed later Koshambi. However, toward the middle of the 18th century, Surat's importance as a port had declined, and Bombay later replaced it as the leading port along the west coast. However, historians argue that Bombay's rise as a port city after Surat's decline was not inevitable, considering its inaccessibility with its hinterland. Although the shift from Surat to Bombay occurred in 1687, it was not until the mid-18th century that Bombay became commercially bigger than Surat. Koshambi. Surat's decline and Bombay's subsequent rise has to be understood in the context of broader world historical changes at that time, marked by a period of punctuation leading to the reorientation of trading networks in the region. Das Gupta argues that the decline of Surat was affected by the declining influence of three empires: the Mughal Empire in India, the Safavid Empire in Iran, and the Ottoman Empire in West Asia. This historical juncture acted as a key blockage, to use Renstit's term, that led to the decline of Surat and reconfiguration of trading networks in the region. The weakening of the Safavid and Ottoman Empire disrupted Surat's trade with West Asia. The decline of the Mughal Empire affected Surat's long-distance trade with Agra, Lahore and Banaras. Thus, as argued by Farooqi, 2006, the decline of Surat was a part of a general crisis in the Western Indian trade, contributing to Surat's declining trade relations with Europe. In addition to these changes, there were also local strategic reasons for the British East India Company to consider a move away from Surat to an alternative site along the western coast. The company was becoming weary of competition from rival European mercantile companies. Moreover, it was also looking for a more secure location, especially after its war with the Dutch in the 1650s. In this context, Bombay's inaccessibility proved to be a significant advantage. Koshambi. It was only after 1784 that Bombay began to grow significantly due to the export of cotton to China in exchange for Chinese tea. However, cotton exports could not keep up with the increasing import of Chinese tea. This difference was compensated with trade in a product that paved the way for Bombay's makeover: opium. The opium trade operated within the triangular relationship between India, Britain and China since the 18th century. While the role of cotton in Bombay's transformation is well documented, the role of opium in capital accumulation in Bombay is relatively under-researched. The opium trade and the emergence of indigenous capitalist class. Opium was of immense importance for the Indian economy, the Indian Empire, and ultimately for the global economy of the 19th century because of its high profit margins. Opium was one of the primary export products of colonial India until the end of the 19th century. This trade was sustained by increasing consumption of opium by China and other parts of South Asia. Richards. We can gauge the importance of opium for the colonial economy from the fact that from the early period of the East India Company until the end of the British empire. Opium earned one of the highest revenues along with revenues from land and salt monopoly. Richards. The income from opium steadily increased from about rupees 17.2 million per year in the 1830s to rupees 50.3 million in the 1850s and was the highest at about rupees 93.5 million in the 1880s. Richards. It is argued that it was the opium trade that led to the emergence of an indigenous capitalist class in India engaged in the opium enterprise around the Port Farooqui. The opium trade not only linked Bombay to the world economy, especially China, but also to other regions along the west coast of India, including Rajasthan, Sindh and Malwa. The British government had a monopoly over the opium trade, which was mainly concentrated in Bengal, even since they gained control of Bihar and Bengal in the 1750s. Opium was grown in the eastern Gangetic Plains, processed in Bihar and Bengal and auctioned and exported from Bengal. However, the control of the British East India Company in western India was relatively weak throughout the 18th century, partly due to the dominance of the Maratha power in western region, which did not relinquish complete control of the region to the British East India Company until the early 19th century. This lack of control of the British East India Company in the western region enabled Indo-Portuguese traders to expand illegal trade of opium produced in western and central India from Bombay through the patronage of local rulers. These traders thwarted the monopolistic control of the British East India Company over the opium in western and central India. Farooqui. Thus, Farooqui argues that modern Bombay has its genesis in the poppy fields in Bihar. Realizing its inability to control the illegal opium trade in the western and central regions, the British East India Company allowed private and mainly Indian enterprise, mostly Marwari and Parsi merchants, in opium along the west coast in 1846. Thus, along with Gangetic opium from Malwa in central India was directed to be shipped to the world market from Bombay. In the mid-19th century, syndicates consisting of wealthy native merchants, especially the Parsis operating in the opium trade, purchased opium auctioned by the government and transported them through ships to Canton, China. Richards. Siddiqui. These entrepreneurial committees later reinvested their profits from opium trade in the emerging textile industry in Bombay. From the mid-19th century, after the trade in opium became unfeasible after the Chinese ban of opium trade and its suppression in the early 20th century. Cotton textiles. Previously, Bombay's economy was centered on the export of cotton to China to settle East India Company's unfavorable balance of trade with China. However, in the middle of the 19th century, indigenous entrepreneurs started manufacturing cotton textiles in Bombay, aided by road and railway development projects between 1830s to 1860 that linked Bombay to its hinterland. Some scholars have argued that Bombay's commercial and industrial development was also shaped in significant ways by its internal economy. Chandavarkar. The commodity markets in this internal economy was linked to more extensive relations of production and exchange in the hinterland through the newly established road and railroad infrastructure. The textile mills of Bombay relied increasingly on its domestic market. Thus, as argued by several scholars in the context of other India cities, the growth of Bombay is not solely due to colonialism but due to a combination of global and regional/local processes. King. Due to a specific colonial economic, military, strategic and political considerations, the involvement of the colonial state in matters of Bombay's urban development was often artificial and uneven. Farooqui. This unevenness is most visible in the built environment of Bombay. Bombay, even ever since its emergence as an industrial city in the mid-19th century, reflecting the growing importance of Bombay as a port, the southernmost tip of the island in facing the harbour. The fort area became the simplest of European settlement in the city. Just north of the fort, separated by an esplanade, was the native settlement. The fort area itself was segregated, with the native Indians concentrated in the north sections and the European population concentrated in the south. The Europeans and the natives were separated not only physically but also socio-economically. The fort, with the central business district, symbolized the sphere of Western capitalism, whereas the native quarter with the domestic bazaar economy reflected the caste-based residential patterns. Dosal, Kidambi. However, as the fort area became overcrowded, the colonial elite began to move to the southern tip of the island, which was a period became the upscale neighborhood of Malabar Hill, an extensive conclave of the Europeans. However, several wealthy Parsi families too settled in that area. Faruqi. Colonial urban planning primarily benefited an elite minority in the city. There were massive investments in grand architectural projects at the expense of critical issues such as housing, transportation, health, and public services that concerned the majority of the city residents. Hazari Singh. Therefore, as Hazari Singh puts it, the economy of Bombay was reasonably affluent in the early 20th century. Only its people remained poor. The systematic anti-poor bias of the colonial officials was especially evident at the time of the bubonic plague that hit the city in 1896. With inadequate knowledge about the etiology of the disease, the colonial plague policy was driven by class and race-based assumptions about the disease related to sanitation and hygiene. This led to the draconian acts that regulated forced eviction and demolition of overcrowded tenements of poor people in the city. Tenements of the poor people in the city. This led to the draconian acts that regularized forced eviction and demolition of overcrowded tenements of poor people in the city. The plague also provided an opportunity for the colonial state to pursue larger urban renewal strategies. In the early 20th century, under the City of Bombay Improvement Trust, formed in 1898, rather than carrying our necessary sanitary improvements, the trust was responsible for creating an orderly city and to improve the image of Bombay as a center for imperial and commercial power. Kidambi. By 1909, the trust had evicted over 50,000 people from their demolished one-room tenements. However, only 2,844 new sanitary tenements were constructed. Hazari Singh. The uneven urban development was also reflected in access to essential services in the city. Despite the mid-19th century population boom, there was no proportionate rise in the public facilities provided by the colonial state. The city constantly grappled with appalling sanitation, high mortality rates, poor roads and transport infrastructure, and inadequate overcrowded housing. Dosal. The development of spinning and weaving mills facilitated the migration of mill workers from the southern coastal areas of Konkan. In 1856, the first textile mill was established, and by the end of 1875, Bombay had 27 mills, and by 1900 this number grew to 82. By the end of the 19th century, Bombay had established itself as an important commercial center in India. The growth of cotton mills also led to growth in various ancillary small-scale industries that led to the emergence of Bombay as a major financial center in India by the end of the 19th century. Kidambi. All this economic activity attracted many people to the city, and Bombay's population grew dramatically. The city's population more than doubled from 2,32,032 in 1833 to more than half of million in 1849. Bombay's population continued to increase in the latter part of the 19th century due to an increase in migration caused by the speculative boom in cotton triggered by the American Civil War in the early 1860s. Kidambi. In 1891, Bombay's population was about 8 lakh, out of which only a quarter was born in the city. Kidambi. The interwar period is a critical period for the growth of the city. Relaxing of the colonial ties during the interwar period led to increased profits within the textile industry and extended its reach in its domestic market. Patel. The textile industry became the largest employer in the city as its employment grew from 1,36,000 in 1921 to 1,47,000 in 1931. Koiman. The textile mills of Bombay relied increasingly on the domestic market. Migrants from different regions were recruited as labor for these mills. However, interestingly, these migrants maintained close ties with these villages and contributed to the rural economy through their remittances. Chanda worker. These continued links with their host villages played a crucial role in sustaining the workers in the city and their labor struggles. Gandhi. Gradually, there emerged a unique working class culture in the area where the mills existed came to be known as Gi. Gradually, there emerged a unique working class culture in the area where the mills existed came to be known as Giran Gaon, or the village of mills. The people who came to work in the textile mills were mostly rural migrants who migrated from the hinterland of Maharashtra, mainly the Konkan region in the west coast, especially Ratnagiri, and the Deccan Ghat or Plateau region in central India, mainly Pune, Satara, Sangli, and Nasik. All those who migrated were essentially small landowners and not landless rural poor. Thus, migration and the possibility of earning quick money further strengthened their rural power base. Chanda workers to sustain themselves in the city and to meet their material needs like employment, credit, and housing. They had to rely on social networks based on ties of caste, region, and kinship. Thus, it was essential for the rural migrants to maintain their rural links, and they did not assimilate in the city by completely losing their rural identity. These rural links forged various working class institutions in cities such as Tamasha, working class theatre, Krida mandals, sports clubs, Vyam salas, gymnasiums, Gramastha mandals, village organizations, khana village, dining houses, and path paidage credit societies that not only cater to their cultural needs but also existential needs such as housing, foods, and finance. Post-colonial Bombay/Mumbai. Several factors had a profound impact on Bombay/Mumbai's post-colonial development. Post-independence demographic change, deindustrialization, and informalization and had a shift from manufacturing to finance and producer services, leading to increasing social and spatial polarization in the city. From 1941 to 1951 AD, the population of the Greater Bombay grew more than 5% due to a growing influx of refugees from Pakistan and migration from the other parts of India post-independence and partition. Furthermore, from the 1960s, Bombay experienced for significant industrial restructuring constituted by growth in decentralized state-supported small-scale power loom sector. This profoundly impacted the textile industry, thus spurring the growth of capital-intensive power looms, resulted in a loss of market share of the labor-intensive mills when WERS worst, along with declining when VA and WERSCH when worst, along with when worst when worst when worst when worst when worst, along with declining share of production. The technological backwardness of textile mills further aggravated the situation. The obsolescence of machinery used in spinning, weaving, and processes has been identified as one of the main causes of sickness in the city. However, this technological backwardness is not new. The mill owners' refusal to modernize the mills facilitated their eventual closure. Thus, frequent textile strikes proved to be a blessing in disguise for the mill owners, enabling them to shut down the mills and reinvest the profits in more lucrative sectors of the new economy. The Bombay textile strike of 1982 from 1982 to 1983 accelerated the decline of textile industry. At the end of the strike, almost 1 lakh workers were retrenched and a considerable amount of units were shut down. In 1976, 27% of the city's organized workforce was employed in the textile industry. This figure dropped to 12.5% by 1991. Patel, the most workers who lost their jobs have joined the informal economy. Employment in the informal sector of the urban economy grew from 49% in 1971 to 66% in 1991. Passioni. Some scholars argue that what happened in Bombay cannot be called deindustrialization but spatial reorganization combined with an increasing expansion of the boundaries of the city. Patel. Due to this process of spatial reorganization, the central part of the city ceased to be the dominant regions of manufacturing as production was dispersed to the suburbs and other satellite centers outside Greater Mumbai, but within the Mumbai metropolitan region such as Thane, Kalyan, and Navi Mumbai. Because of this, the central part of the city, including the mill district in Mumbai, have now become the epicenter of the new economy in Mumbai, based on service industries including finance, tourism, retailing, and entertainment. By early 1990s, this shift in the Mumbai's economy toward jobs related to producer services became more visible, as seen in the following quote from Patel. By 1994, Bombay accounted for 61% jobs in India's oil sector, 41% in domestic air traffic. Its airport handled 75% of the country's imports and 64% of exports. Employment in financial and business services had increased by 43% between the 1970s and 1980s. Bombay collected 25% of India's income tax revenues and 60% of custom revenues. Its bank controlled 12% of national capital deposits and a quarter of national deposits and a quarter of the country's outstanding credits. The number of issues listed in the Bombay Stock Exchange grew from 203 from 1991 to 1992 to 694 from 1993 to 1994, and the amount of fresh capital in old and new companies increased from Rs 54 billion to 213 billion between these these years. The decline of manufacturing witnessed the decline of manufacturing witnessed a rise in finance and power producer services. In Bombay, aided by the significant economic reforms in India by the mid-1980s. In Greater Mumbai, the employment in finance and services increased from 52.1% in 1980s to 64.3% in 1990s, whereas employment in manufacturing decreased from 36% to 28.5% during the same period. MMRD at 1995, the formal introduction of the structural adjustment policy in 1991, popularly referred to as liberalization, further accelerated the process of urban restructuring in the city. India announced official reforms of economic liberalization and deregulation in 1991. Further, in 1992, as part of structural adjustment program to facilitate economic liberalization, the central government announced a policy of political devolution of authority through the 17th Amendment Act to enlarge the scope of municipal institutions. These reforms have transformed the institutional framework of urban governance in India and have created the conditions for the growth of finance and producer services and increasing private sector involvement in policy making and implementation. Reforms have also prompted the entry of foreign-owned companies in Mumbai, leading to a speculative increase in real estate values. Nijman. Most of these new foreign companies were finance and producer services. Nijman. Post-reform urban planning in Mumbai is self-consciously geared toward reorganizing city space to render it a global or world-class status to convert the city into a significant financial and service center. Banerjee Guha. Informally, this is referred to as the Sanghanization of Mumbai, alluding to Shanghai as the preferred model of development for Mumbai. Gadge, Mahadeviya and Narayan. One of the central components of Sanghanization is to increase the supply of land for commercial and high-end residential purposes through deregulation. The logic behind deregulation is that it will lead to convergence of the real estate market in Mumbai with other global cities. The draft regional plan for the Mumbai metropolitan region from 1996 to 2011 envisaged Mumbai's role as an international city driven by financial and business services, which would facilitate the integration of India's economy with the rest of the world. De Monte, MMRDA 1995. In order to do this, the plan recommends increasing the role of the private sector in infrastructure and deregulating land. This plan marked a severe departure from early 1973 plan that emphasized dispersal and decentralization of industry and provision of broader employment to large sections of the city. Gadge. In 2003, the international consultancy from McKinsey & Company drew up a comprehensive plan to transform Mumbai into a world-class city. Some of its recommendations include increasing land availability by 50 to 70%, creating islands of excellence, upscale residential and commercial spaces, and redevelopment the city block by block. Bombay First 2003. These visions of Bombay First report were later endorsed in 2004 by the government of Maharashtra. Its report De Monte. Following these reports from 2004 to 2005, the state government violently demolished 94,000 homes to free up 288.8 acres of land for development. This demolition drive was described as Operation Shanghai in the newspapers Mahadevia and Narayan. This demolition drive was described as Operation Shanghai in the newspapers Mahadevia and Narayan. The impetus of post-reform urban planning on increasing land availability for upscale residential and commercial spaces brings into focus the question of the redevelopment of the older built environment in central parts of the city constituted by the textile mills district. Today there are 58 functional mills, 33 privately owned and 25 managed by the central government and one owned by the state government. The vacant mill lands were keenly sought for redevelopment after the boom of real estate prices from the late 1980s to early 1990s. The total value of the 600 acres of the mill lands in the 1990s was estimated to be around rupees 50 billion. Paul Sethi and Krishnan. The Development Control DC rules of 1991 were amended to facilitate modernization of the mill lands. As per the new rules, a part of the excess mill lands could be redeveloped. One part of the profits from the redevelopment was to be invested in the revival of the mill, and the other part was to be used to regenerate employment for the workers. The underdeveloped parts of the mill were to be distributed in three parts: one third for low income housing, one third civic amenities, and one third for the development of the mill owner. However, in practice, the mill owners exploited loopholes in the law to entirely redevelop or sell the mill lands. Fernandez and Pinto. Some of the mills were converted to upscale malls such as the Phoenix Mall in Lower Parel. In addition to the DC rules, the sale of mill land was also subject to guidelines of the Urban Land Ceiling and Regulation Act (ULCRA), which set limits on the development of surplus mill land. However, in 2011, as a result of a sustained campaign of developers, ULCRA was scrapped. The developers argued that scrapping of ULCRA would free up 25,000 hectares of land needed to attract foreign investors. I have used the term globalizing marginality elsewhere to describe this genus-faced nature of contemporary urban transformation in Mumbai, whereby on the one hand the globalizing impulse of the new world economy has subjected the city to new strategies of urban development and regulations, while on the other hand this very process of globalizing caters exclusively to certain key economic sectors and elites, marginalizing most of the population. Gadche. However, these new global visions have engendered a new form of local politics in the form of poor people's movement in the city involving slum dwellers. However, these new global visions have engendered a new form of local politics in the form of poor people's movements in the city involving slum dwellers, erstwhile textile mill workers and street vendors who lay claim to alternative visions of the city that draw on the earlier inclusive histories of urban experience. In contemporary globalization, in contemporary globalization, In contemporary globalization, cities have re-emerged as critical entities in the organization of the world economy. However, dominant urban theories such as the world city and global city have ignored the long-term historical context, thereby exaggerating the global context of today's urban transformation. A long-duration perspective has shown that cities as key nodes were embedded in broader circuits of production, exchange, and culture throughout history. Based on a long duration perspective, this paper maps a long term historical development of Bombay/Mumbai, taking into account the global and local dynamics of the region. The paper used two analytical frames of the port city and the colonial city to facilitate our understanding of the connections and disconnections in the making of Bombay/Mumbai that has a profound bearing on the nature of contemporary urban transformation. Bombay's emergence as a port city is the result of both its global linkages in the world economy as well as its local linkages with its hinterland. Although Bombay's growth as a port city took place during the British expansion in the 19th century, one needs to take into account a much earlier history of adaptation and expansion of maritime networks of trade and cultural exchange in the Indian Ocean region. Before Bombay, Surat was the preeminent port city within a 13th century pre-colonial Asian maritime network that was later expanded by European colonial trade. It was only with the decline of Surat due to a decline of various Islamic trading empires in the world that Bombay's rise as an essential port city along the west coast of India was made possible. The opium trade led to the emergence of an indigenous capitalist class who later reinvested their profits from opium trade in the emerging textile industry in Bombay from the mid-19th century. With the introduction of the textile mills and the railroad infrastructure, there was a systematic linking of Bombay to its hinterland as migrants from different regions were increasingly recruited in the mills. The post-independence period saw much of the profits from the textile industry invested in new industries including chemicals, pharmaceuticals, consumer goods, engineering and automobile production, further consolidating Mumbai's role as India's commercial capital. Since 1980s, deindustrialization and policies of liberalization and deregulation have transformed the economic landscape of Mumbai, enabling its integration into the global economy. This is evident in the growth of foreign corporate presence in the city management, as well as the growth of information technology-led industries comprising of finance and producer services, mass media, and entertainment and communications. But at the same time, the city continues to rely on the ever-increasing informal labor of poor migrants in the small-scale workshops of electronics, garments, plastics, and consumer goods. Passioni. The existence of this dual economic world is also reflected in the polarized visions of the city's future. The elite and the middle class in the city are enamored by emerging global visions of prosperity and connectivity, while the poor majority cling onto the historical promise of Bombay/Mumbai as the city of the working class. The process of Bombay/Mumbai's integration into the world economy has been and remains far from even. Historically, it was a colonial city whose development catered to metropolitan interests in Britain and the elite minority in the city. The colonial urban planning starkly reflected elite interests that produced inequalities resulting from an uneven built environment and unequal access to essential services among its residents, problems that are at the heart of Mumbai's contemporary global transformation. Bibliography: Abu Lughod J. The Tale of Two Cities: The Origin of Modern Cairo, Contemporary Studies in Society and History. Abu Lughod J. Before European Hegemony, the World System, AD from 1250 to 1350 AD, New York, NY, Oxford University Press. Amin A. and Thrift and Cities Reimagining the Urban, Cambridge, England, Polity Press. Anjaria J.S. Guardians, The Bourgeois City, citizenship, public space and middle class activism in Mumbai city and community. Arighi Ji, the long 20th century, money, power and the origins of our times, New York, New NY, Warsaw, Banerjee Guha as shifting cities, urban restructuring in Mumbai, economic and political weekly, Bombay first, Vision Mumbai, transforming Mumbai into a world-class city. A summary of recommendations: Bombay First and McKinsey and Company. Retrieve, Broadel F. Civilization and capitalism from 15th to 18th century. The perspective of the world. Volume 3. New York, Harper and Row. NY, New York, NY, Harper and New York, NY, Harper and Row. Brenner and World City Theory, Globalization and the Comparative Historical Method, Urban Affairs Review, September. Castells M. The Urban or Question, A Marxist Approach, Cambridge, the MIT Press, Chakraborty S. From Colonial City to Globalizing City, The Far from Complete Spatial Transformation of Kolkata in P. Marcuse and R. Van Kempen, Globalizing Cities, A New Spatial Order, Malden, M.A. Blackwell Publishing, Chanda Worker R. The Origins of Industrial Capitalism in India, Business Strategies and the Working Classes in Bombay, from 1900 to 1940, Cambridge, England, Cambridge University Press, Chaudhry K.N. Asia Before Europe, Economy and Civilization of the Indian Ocean from the Rise of Islam to 1750, Cambridge, England, Cambridge University Press, Da Kunha G. The Origin of Bombay, New Delhi, India, Asian Educational Services, original work published in 1900. Das Gupta, Indian Merchant and the Decline of Surat, century from 1500 to 1800. Davis D. Cities in Global Context, A Brief Intellectual History, International Journal of Urban Regional Research, D. Monte D. Reaping the Fabric, The Decline of Mumbai and Its Mills, New Delhi, India, Oxford University Press, Dosal M. Imperial Designs in Indian Realities, The Planning of Bombay City, from 1845 to 1875, Bombay, India, Oxford University Press, Dwara P. Asia Redux, The Conceptualizing a Region for Our Times, The Journal of Asian Studies, Farooqi A. Opium City, The Making of Early Victorian Bombay, New Delhi, India, 3 Essays Collective, Fernandez and N.R. Pinto, Murder of the Mills, An Inquiry into Bombay's Textile Industry and its Workers, Mumbai, Lokshahi Hak Sanghatna, Friedman J. Sanghatna, Friedman J. The World City, Fernandez and R. Pinto, The Murder of the Mills, An Inquiry into Bombay's Textile Industry and its Workers, Mumbai, Lokshahi Hak and Sanghatna, Friedman J. The World City Hypothesis, in P.L. Knox and P.J. Taylor, World Cities in a World System, Cambridge, England, Cambridge University Press, Gandhi M. Landscape of Disaster, Water, Modernity and Urban Fragmentation in Mumbai, Environment and Planning, Gardje R. Globalizing Marginality, Spatial Politics of 21st Century Mumbai, The Journal of Interdisciplinary Policy Research and Action, Gardje R. Understanding the Bombay Textile Strike of 1980 from 1982 to 1983, The Workers of World, International Journal on Strikes and Social Conflict, Gills D.K. and Thompson W.R. Globalization and Global History, New York, N.Y. Routledge, Grant R. and J. Nijman, Globalization and the Corporate Geography of Cities in Less Developed World, Analogy of the Association of American Geographers, Harris A. From London to Mumbai and Back Again, Centrification and Public Policy in Comparative Perspective, Urban Studies, Harris and Bombay in the Global Economy, in S. Patel and A. Thorner. Bombay, Metaphor for Modern India. Bombay, India, Oxford University Press. Hazari Singh as Colonial Modernism and Flawed Paradigms of Urban Renewal, Uneven Development in Bombay from 1900 to 1925, Urban History. Kennedy, L. and Jera M. H. Shift to City. The shift to city-centric growth strategies perspective from Hyderabad and Mumbai in the Economic and Political Weekly. Kidambi P. The Making of an Indian Metropolis, Colonial Governance and Public Culture in Bombay from 1890 to 1920. Elder Sort, UK. Ashgate King A. Colonial Urban Development, Culture, Social Power and Environment, London, England. Routledge and Kagan Paul. King A. Global Cities, Post-Imperialism and the Internationalization of London, England. Routledge and King A. Species of Global Culture, Architecture, Urbanism, Identity. New York. Routledge. Koiman D. Bombay, from fishing village to colonial port city from 1662 to 1947 in R. Ross and G. J. Telkamp. Colonial Cities, Essay on Urbanism in a Colonial Context. Dordrecht, the Netherlands, Martinus Nijhoff Publishers. Kosambi M. Colonial Urban Transformation in India in M. Hassan and Gupta. India's Colonial Encounter. Essays in Memory of Eric Strauch, New Delhi, India. Manohar Mahadevia D. and Narayan H. Sanghaing, Mumbai. Politics of Evictions. Sanghaing, Politics of Evictions and Resistance in Slum Settlements, Center for Development Alternatives, Ahmedabad, India. Working Press, MMRD, 1995. Draft Regional Plan for Mumbai Metropolitan Region from 1996 to 2011, Mumbai, India. Nandi A. Introduction in Indian Popular Cinema at the Slum's Eye View of Politics. In A. Nandi, The Secret Politics of Our Desires, Innocence, Culpability, and Indian Popular Cinema. Delhi, India. Oxford University Press. Nijman J. Mumbai's real estate market in the 1990s, deregulation, global money and casino capitalism, Economic and Political Weekly. Nijman J. Mumbai since liberalization, the space economy of India's gateway city in a Shaw, Indian cities in transition, New Delhi, India. Orient Longman, Nijman J. Against the Odds, Slum Rehabilitation in Neoliberal Mumbai cities. Nijman J. Mumbai as a Global City, a Theoretical Essay in B. Derudar, M. Hoyler, E. J. Taylor and F. Whitlock's International Handbook of Globalization and World Cities. Cheltenham, England. Edward Elgar Publishing. Ong A. Worldling Cities or the Art of Being Global. In a Roy and A. Ong, Worldling Cities or the Art of Being Global. In A. Roy and A. Ong, Worldling Cities, Asian Experiments and the Art of Being Global. Sussex, England. Wiley Blackwell, Passioni M. City Profile, Mumbai Cities. Paraka D.J. Introduction to Understanding Transformations in the Arabian Peninsula, Journal of Global Initiatives. Paul S. Bombay and Mumbai, Identities, Politics and Populism in S.J. and S. Patel and J. Marceloj, Bombay and Mumbai, The City in Transition, New Delhi, India. Oxford University Press. Patel S. Bombay/Mumbai, Globalization, Inequalities and Politics in J. Googler, World Cities Beyond the West, Cambridge, England, Cambridge University Press, Paul A. Setty P. Krishnan as City as Extra Curricular Space, Instituting Urban Pedagogy in South Asia, Inter-Asia Cultural Studies, Prakash G. The Urban Turn in the Sarai Reader, The Cities of Everyday Life, Delhi, India, Sarai/Amsterdam, Society for Old and New Media, Richard J.F. The Opium Industry in British India, Indian Economic Social History Review, Terence J.K. Three Steps in Globalization, Global Networks from 1000 BC to 2050 CE in B.K. Gills B.K. Gills and W.R. Thompson, Globalization and Global History, New York, N.Y. Routledge, Roy A. The 21st Century Metropolis, New Geographies of Theory, Regional Studies, Session S. The Global City, New York, London, Tokyo, Princeton, NJ, Princeton University Press, Session S. Cities in a World Economy, Thousand Oaks, CA Pine Forge Press, Session X. Session S. The Global City, New York, London, Tokyo, Princeton, NJ, Princeton University Press, Senj, The Unintended City, Seminar 400, Senti, 2010, The Intricacies of Pre-Modern Asian Connections, The Journal of Asian Studies, Siddiqui A. The Business World of Jamsetji J.G. Bhoy, Indian Economic Social History Review, Simon A. From the City Yet to Come, For the City Yet to Come, Changing African Life in Four Cities, Durham, NC, Duke University Press, Van Wurst H. The Bombay Textile Strikes from 1982 to 1983, Bombay, India, Oxford University Press, Wallerstein I. The Politics of World Economy, Cambridge, England, Cambridge University Press, Wallerstein I. World Systems Analysis, Analysis and Introduction, Durham, NJ, Duke University Press, Washbrook D. From Comparative Sociology to Global History, Britain and India in Prehistory of Modernity, Journal of the Economic and Social History of the Orient, Jerah M.H. Middle Class Neighborhood Associations as Political Players in Mumbai, Economic and Political Weekly Magazine, November. धन्यवाद. Thank you so much.